Hello, dear listener, and welcome to tonight's quiet journey into the past. Imagine, for a moment, that you are stirring awake in a world far removed from the comforts you know today. The year is somewhere in the middle of the 13th century, and instead of soft mattresses, clean sheets, and the hum of distant traffic, your morning begins on a pile of straw, flattened by your weight, scattered with dust, and often crawling with tiny creatures that thrive in such bedding. The air in your hut is heavy and thick, filled with smoke from a hearth that smolders throughout the night. It seeps into every surface, darkening the beams above you, settling into the cloth you wear, and catching in your throat with each shallow breath. A single shaft of sunlight may cut through the cracks of wooden shutters, but it is not enough to illuminate the dim interior fully. Around you, your family stirs as well, your parents, siblings, perhaps even a grandparent, all sharing this one-room dwelling. Privacy, as you understand it, does not exist here. You sleep together not only for lack of space, but also for warmth against the biting chill that slips through walls of wattle and daub. And sometimes, nestled close by, a goat or a chicken might shift in its sleep too. For animals are valuable property, and, in the darkness, it is safer to keep them inside. As you lift yourself from the bedding, you are greeted by the aches of yesterday's work. Backs are rarely straight in medieval England. Joints carry the weight of fields tilled by hand, of water carried from distant wells, of endless bending, stooping, and lifting. You cough, and the sound is echoed by others, for almost everyone suffers from the same persistent ailments. Colds that linger for months, lungs that rasp from smoke and dampness. The floor beneath you is packed earth, uneven and cool, often scattered with rushes meant to keep things cleaner, though in truth they mostly conceal scraps of food, spilled ale, and the droppings of rodents. The room is dim, but the smell is vivid. A mingling of smoke, sweat, animals, and the sourness of unwashed bodies. There is little point in imagining soap or fresh water within arm's reach. Such luxuries belong to a different age. Instead, you stretch and prepare yourself for another day that will be just as demanding as the last. For in medieval England, survival is not measured by comfort, but by endurance. It is early, though the concept of precise timekeeping is unfamiliar to you. A cock's crow, the faint graying of the sky, or the toll of a distant church bell might be your only indicators that morning has come. If you are fortunate enough to live in a village with a parish church, its bells mark the rhythms of your life, summoning you not only to prayer but to labor, feasts, and obligations. The sound carries over fields and woods, reminding all who hear it of their place in the order of things. You rise when you must, for daylight is precious and fleeting, especially in the deep winters. Yet, unlike the steady glow of electric lamps, the sun cannot be summoned on command. You learn to live in harmony with its movements. Some mornings, frost clings to the edges of your dwelling, and the chill gnaws at your fingertips. Other mornings, the dampness of English air makes the hut feel as though it is sweating with you, the moisture soaking into clothing and bedding alike. No matter the weather, You step into it with little choice, for the day ahead is already demanding your presence. The first sounds of the outside world begin to stir. The clatter of a wooden bucket against stone, the lowing of cattle in nearby pastures, the murmur of voices as neighbors emerge from their own huts. Villages in medieval England are small, sometimes no more than a cluster of a few dozen households arranged along a muddy track. From your doorway, you see the familiar scene: timber-framed houses leaning slightly with age, smoke rising in lazy threads from their chimneys, the ground churned to mud by countless feet and hooves. Children, barefoot and untroubled by the chill, already begin to chase one another, while their mothers call them back to tasks. Beyond the village stretches a patchwork of fields, open strips of land, worked communally, where every family has its allotted portion. These fields are not just soil, they are lifelines, and their harvests mean the difference between hunger and survival. The lords who claim ownership over them loom in your thoughts as well, for your labor and rent bind you to the land as much as tradition does. The village is both comfort and prison. It provides community and structure, yet it keeps you tethered to endless toil. But before the labors of the day, there is the quiet moment of awakening, the transition from restless sleep to weary motion. You rub your eyes and look upon the simple world around you. A family huddled close for warmth, walls patched with clay and straw, beams blackened with smoke. Outside, the day stretches wide, full of demands, yet within the hut you feel the closeness of medieval life. There are no doors to close, no walls to separate, no solitude to retreat into. You are bound, utterly, to the rhythms of family, village, and earth. To wake here is to remember, instantly, that you are not an individual in the way modern life allows, but a piece of something larger, tied to kin, tied to the church, tied to the soil that will claim your labor again and again. And in this moment, you realize why such a beginning would overwhelm a modern soul. The lack of privacy, the cold, the damp, the constant presence of others, the absence of comfort. It is not just that you would find it difficult. It is that such a life demands a kind of endurance that few today could summon. The day has barely begun, and already you feel the weight of survival pressing down upon you. When you finally rise from your bedding and shake the sleep from your limbs, you might instinctively expect a morning meal to ease the start of your day. Yet in medieval England, the concept of breakfast is far from what you know. For peasants, there is often nothing at all to eat upon waking. The body must be steeled against hunger, carrying you into the fields or into your chores without the luxury of food first. Many believe that eating too early in the day was a kind of indulgence, unnecessary for the humble and sinful for the pious. For those who labored hardest, hunger was a constant companion, gnawing at the belly but endured with resignation. If food is taken, it is meager, perhaps a crust of yesterday's coarse bread, dense and dark with barley or rye, hard enough to strain the teeth. To soften it, you might dip it into small beer or thin ale, for water itself is rarely trusted. The liquid fills your stomach, dulling the ache for a time, though it carries little nourishment. For nobles, the situation is not so different in the earliest hours. They may also abstain from eating until later in the morning, though their eventual fare is richer, more varied, and a sign of their elevated station. Still, in these quiet first hours, hunger presses equally on both peasant and lord, a reminder that the day's sustenance is always fragile, never assured. Imagine yourself seated on a low stool, clutching a wooden bowl that holds little more than a ladle of pottage. This stew-like mixture, made from whatever grains, beans, or vegetables remain from the night before, is reheated over the hearth, thin and bland, yet filling enough to silence hunger. It might contain onions, leeks, or cabbage softened into the broth, but rarely does it carry the richness of meat. For most villagers, meat is an occasional gift, tasted only on feast days or in rare moments of abundance. More often, bones are boiled for flavor, or scraps from the Lord's table may make their way down to you, if fortune allows. Alongside the pottage, a heel of bread may be shared among the family, torn with hands and passed from one to the next. Butter, cheese, or eggs could brighten the meal if your household is lucky enough to have access to them, but these are not daily certainties. Instead, the flavors of breakfast are muted, earthy, and plain, designed not to delight, but to sustain. Each bite reminds you that food in this world is not pleasure but survival, carefully measured against the needs of a family, a village, and a season's harvest. The drink that accompanies this morning fare is seldom clear water. Wells and streams are often fouled by waste, runoff, and the press of animals, so ale and small beer become the safer alternatives. Brewed weak and consumed by all ages, even children, these drinks carry little strength but enough to quench thirst and reduce the risks of sickness. Their taste is sour, yeasty, sometimes sharp, but they are as common to the medieval table as water is to yours. In noble households, wine may appear, imported at great cost from distant lands, though even the highborn drink ale as part of their daily habit. The simple act of drinking reveals the divide of class. For peasants, it is necessity. For nobles, it is choice. As you sip the ale, you are reminded again of how fragile the body feels in this world, where every swallow must be carefully considered, and where even the safest drink is bound to labor and trade. If you are of the lower sort, hunger often outpaces what little food is available. There are days when even the crust of bread is absent, when the pottage pot holds only thin broth, and when the gnawing in your stomach must be endured until the evening meal. Famines are not rare in this age. A poor harvest, too much rain, or too little sun can strip entire regions of their food supply, leaving villagers gaunt, children weakened, and the old pushed quietly toward death. In such times, breakfast disappears altogether, replaced by desperate measures. Acorns ground into flour, weeds boiled into bitter soups, anything to stave off the emptiness. For nobles, the threat of hunger is less severe, but it is not absent. Even great lords depend on the land and on weather, their tables subject to shortages when nature withholds her gifts. Hunger is democratic in its cruelty, though its grip is felt more tightly by the poor. To awaken in medieval England, therefore, is to begin your day already negotiating with scarcity, already aware that every bite you take diminishes a supply that may not be replenished easily. And yet, despite this harshness, there is ritual and community woven into the act of eating. Families gather close around the hearth, sharing from a common pot, breaking bread together as both necessity and symbol. Each mouthful may be plain, but it binds you to those around you, reminding you that survival is a shared endeavor. In noble halls, the first meal of the day is taken later, around mid-morning, and with far greater ceremony. Trays of bread, trenchers cut from coarse loaves, cured meats, fish, and spiced wine appear, accompanied by attendants and the murmur of Latin prayers. Even here, however, the act of eating reflects duty as much as pleasure. The Lord demonstrates his wealth and power through abundance, while his household affirms their loyalty by partaking at his table. For the modern visitor to this world, the absence of sweetness, the scarcity of comfort, and the constant presence of hunger would weigh heavily. To face each day without the assurance of breakfast, without the certainty of coffee, fruit, or grain at hand, is to step into a life defined not by choice but by endurance. And as you finish your small share of bread or broth, you realize that the harsh reality of medieval breakfast is not only about what is eaten, but about what is missing: security, variety, and the freedom to eat until satisfied. The morning light has scarcely broken fully across the fields when your work begins. For peasants, whose lives are tied to the soil, there is no lingering after the first meal. Tools are gathered: wooden plows, heavy hoes, crude sickles, and bodies move toward the land that demands their endless attention. Fields stretch beyond the village, marked in long strips shared among households, each family tending its portion in the great communal system that governs survival. The earth itself feels heavy in this age, often waterlogged by England's damp climate, resisting the wooden plow that bites shallowly into its surface. Oxen are harnessed to pull the burden, their patient strength guiding the furrow, while men trudge behind, shoulders straining, feet sinking into the muck. For women, labor is just as relentless, though often closer to home, grinding grain into coarse meal with hand querns, hauling water from wells or streams, spinning wool into thread. The rhythm is unceasing, the body bending and lifting again, until it aches with the familiarity of the motion. In medieval England, idleness is not merely frowned upon, it is impossible. To pause for too long is to risk hunger, and hunger is never far away. As the sun rises higher, the village hums with a steady cadence of activity. In the fields, sowing or harvesting is a communal effort, neighbors working side by side, exchanging not words of leisure but the clipped, practical language of necessity. Children as young as 5 are put to work, their small hands chasing birds from seedbeds or gathering wood for the hearth. Women balance countless tasks at once, tending infants while preparing meals, brewing ale in great cauldrons, or mending clothing that must last through years of wear. Laundry, too, is no small task, scrubbing heavy garments in cold water, beaten against stones, until fingers are raw and numb. For the men, cutting hay, repairing fences, or carting manure across fields fills the long daylight hours. And always, the sense of obligation hangs heavy to the land, to the seasons, to the Lord whose authority stretches over all. Work is not merely labor here. It is a condition of existence, dictated by birth, reinforced by necessity, and sanctified by custom. For those accustomed to modern conveniences, the sheer weight of such endless chores would prove overwhelming within a single day. The tools in your hands tell their own story of difficulty. A sickle is sharp but small, requiring endless sweeps of the arm to harvest even a modest patch of grain. A wooden plow cracks and splinters easily, demanding constant repair. Iron tools exist, but are expensive, often borrowed or shared among villagers, each nick in their edges a reminder of their costliness. There are no machines to ease the burden, no engines to quicken the pace. Every step of the process depends on the human body, its endurance, its coordination, its willingness to bend against the earth again and again. Even the animals that assist in the work, oxen, horses, donkeys, require labor themselves, feeding, grooming, harnessing. Each task multiplies into another, until it seems that every waking hour is consumed by the effort of sustaining life. The strain bends the body early, spines curve with age, teeth wear down from coarse bread, and hands harden into tools themselves, calloused and scarred. To work in medieval England is to surrender the body to necessity year after year, until strength fails and the cycle passes to the next generation. Yet beyond the sheer toil of farming, other forms of work press upon you. If you are bound to a lord's estate, obligations extend beyond your family's own needs. Labor must be given to the manor fields, roads must be repaired, hedges trimmed, and carts loaded when summoned. These duties, known as feudal obligations, are owed not by choice but by birth, reminders that your time is not entirely your own. Craftsmen, too, endure their share of hardship. The blacksmith toils over the forge, sweat pouring from his brow as he shapes iron in choking heat. The carpenter works tirelessly with saw and chisel, his livelihood dependent on both skill and the favor of wealthier patrons. Even the miller, whose water wheel turns with seeming ease, labors endlessly to grind the grain that feeds the village, his hands coated always in flour, his reputation often shadowed by suspicion of dishonesty. Work in medieval England takes many forms, but it shares one common thread. It is demanding, repetitive, and rarely rewarded beyond subsistence. As the day lengthens, fatigue becomes its own companion. There is no respite save for brief pauses to drink ale or chew on hard bread carried into the fields. Meals are often taken standing or crouched upon the earth, the hands that eat still marked with soil. For women, rest is equally elusive. When one chore ends, another begins, and even into the evening, spinning wheels must turn, children must be soothed, animals must be penned. Darkness, when it falls, brings no true relief but only a shift in tasks. And so, when you imagine yourself thrust into this life, it is not the singular difficulty of one labor that daunts you, but the relentlessness of them all combined. To rise with the sun, to toil until dusk, to rest only briefly before the cycle repeats. This is the fabric of medieval life. For those accustomed to labor-saving machines, artificial light, and food always within reach, such a life would feel unbearable in its unyielding demand. And yet for the people of medieval England, it was simply the way of existence, accepted with little complaint because there was no other choice. This is why a single day of such labor would leave a modern soul utterly spent, unable to grasp how much endurance was required to merely survive. As the day wears on and the village hums with labor, the backdrop of life in medieval England is not only toil, but filth. Imagine stepping from your hut into a street that is little more than a churn of mud and refuse. There are no paved walkways here, no drains to carry away waste. Instead, ditches run along the edges of paths, brimming with stagnant water, animal dung, and scraps thrown carelessly aside. The very air carries the stench of rot and smoke, mingling into a heavy haze that clings to clothing and skin. Pigs and dogs roam freely, nosing through the piles of refuse, scattering bones, scraps, and human waste. Vermin thrive here, rats scurrying through the straw, fleas leaping from animal to human without distinction. Inside homes, the situation is scarcely better. Straw strewn across the floors to mask dampness is seldom replaced, becoming a breeding ground for lice and fleas. Smoke from the hearth blackens the rafters, irritates the lungs, and settles into every breath you take. To live in medieval England is to live in the constant presence of dirt, a condition so ordinary that it passes without remark, yet one that quietly shapes health and shortens lives. With filth comes disease, and in this age, sickness is a shadow never far behind. Common ailments linger like unwelcome companions, coughs that never clear, fevers that burn unchecked, wounds that fester from the smallest cut. Childhood illnesses, measles, whooping cough, diphtheria, claim countless young lives, so that to see only half of one's children grow to adulthood is considered normal. Malnutrition weakens the body further, leaving immune systems frail and unable to resist infection. And then there are the terrors that arrive without warning, sweeping across villages with merciless force. Dysentery, carried by tainted water, leaves entire families doubled over in agony. Leprosy, feared for its disfigurement, isolates sufferers into hospitals or marginal lands. Above all looms the specter of plague, the Black Death that would later, in the 14th century, wipe away nearly half of England's population, But even before its arrival, lesser outbreaks of pestilence haunted the land. Illness is not an exception in this world. It is the expectation, the backdrop to daily existence. To fall sick is to gamble with survival, and more often than not, the odds are poor. What, then, of medicine? In medieval England, healing is as much a matter of faith and superstition as of knowledge. Physicians, scarce and costly, serve mainly the wealthy, prescribing remedies grounded in ancient texts more than practical evidence. The theory of the four humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, dominates their understanding of the body. If you are ill, it is believed that one of these humors has fallen out of balance, and treatments are designed to restore harmony: bloodletting with leeches, purging with herbs or harsh substances, or inducing sweating to cleanse the system. For the poor, such treatments are rarely available, and healing is entrusted instead to local wise women, herbalists, or midwives. Their remedies draw on generations of knowledge: infusions of chamomile for sleep, garlic for infections, honey for wounds. Some of these carry real effectiveness, though understood not in scientific terms, but as gifts of nature or blessings of God. Alongside them linger charms, prayers, and rituals, for illness is seen not only as physical but spiritual, punishment for sin, the mark of evil, or a test of faith. A simple fever, therefore, might summon not only herbs but also holy water, relics, and whispered incantations. The setting of care reflects this same mixture of faith and fragility. Hospitals exist, though they are not places of cure as you might expect. Instead, they are houses of rest and prayer, often attached to monasteries, where the sick are given shelter, food, and spiritual comfort, but little in the way of treatment. Monks tend to the ill, reciting prayers, offering bread and broth, and applying poultices of herbs grown in cloister gardens. Their concern is for the soul as much as the body, for to die with confession and communion is to secure salvation. For many ailments, care happens at home, with family members improvising remedies from what little they possess. A poultice of mashed onions or nettles might be pressed against an infection, while a cup of warm ale mixed with honey might be offered to ease a sore throat. These measures, sometimes helpful, sometimes harmful, are applied with hope rather than certainty. To fall ill in medieval England is to place your fate in the hands of both human and divine forces, never knowing whether relief will come or whether your days are numbered. For a modern soul transported into this world, the encounter with medieval dirt and disease would be overwhelming. The absence of sanitation, the constant presence of pests, the lack of reliable cures, all combine into a reality that feels unrelenting. A simple cut on your hand could spiral into a life-threatening infection. Drinking from the wrong stream could bring days of agony. A cough might never leave you, settling into your lungs until it steals your breath entirely. And yet, medieval people endured it as part of the rhythm of life. Their resilience, shaped by a world where suffering was expected and death was never distant. They found comfort in faith, in community, in the small victories of survival from one season to the next. But for you, accustomed to antibiotics, clean water, and warm hospitals, even a single day in such conditions might feel unbearable. Disease and dirt were not interruptions in medieval life. They were woven into its very fabric, a constant reminder of how fragile the body is and how uncertain each tomorrow could be. To live here is to accept that uncertainty as ordinary, and it is precisely why a modern visitor would struggle to last even one day. As the sun climbs higher and the work of the day continues, you become ever more aware that your labor and even your very life are not entirely your own. In medieval England, society rests upon a pyramid of obligation, at the top of which sits your local lord. Whether a minor knight or a great baron, he holds the land on which you live, and through him your rights to farm, to dwell, and even to survive are granted. You and your neighbors owe him rents, taxes, and above all, service. To refuse is not an option. It is the natural order, as unquestioned as the rising of the sun. The Lord's manor stands apart, larger than the huts of villagers, built in stone or strong timber, with a hall that serves as both residence and symbol of authority. His word carries the weight of law, and his reeves, bailiffs, and stewards enforce it with vigilance. At every turn you are reminded that your toil is not merely for yourself, but for him. To live in medieval England is to live under the shadow of this power, constant and unquestionable. Justice in this world flows from the same source. If disputes arise among villagers over land boundaries, stolen animals, or unpaid debts, they are brought before the manor court, where the lord or his steward presides. The proceedings are simple, public, and heavily weighted in favor of authority. Neighbors serve as jurors, but their task is less to weigh evidence than to affirm the expectations of custom. If you are accused, your standing in the village, your reputation, and even the mood of the Lord may matter more than the facts. Punishments are swift and designed not only to correct, but to warn others. A thief might be put in the stocks, his humiliation serving as spectacle for all to see. A dishonest miller might face fines or seizure of his goods. More serious crimes, poaching on the Lord's land, rebellion, or repeated theft, could lead to brutal punishments, whipping, mutilation, or death by hanging at the gallows that loom just beyond the village. To witness these acts is to be reminded constantly of your vulnerability and of the harsh edge of justice that lies close at hand. For lesser matters, ordeals sometimes decide guilt or innocence. In earlier centuries, one might be forced to carry a red-hot iron a set number of paces or plunge a hand into boiling water, with the wounds inspected days later. If they healed cleanly, God had shown your innocence. If not, guilt was proven. Though such practices faded over time, they reveal how deeply faith and fear intertwined in the pursuit of justice. Oaths, too, carried weight. If you could gather a group of neighbors to swear to your honesty, your case might be dismissed. But if your reputation faltered, no one would risk their word for you. For many villagers, the line between justice and survival was thin, for a single false accusation could ruin a family. Modern notions of fairness, lawyers, and impartial judges are absent here. Instead, authority is immediate, personal, and absolute. To fall afoul of it is to risk your livelihood, your body, or even your life. The presence of the Lord's authority is felt not only in the courts, but in daily obligations. Each year, you must pay rents not only in coin, but in labor and goods. Chickens, eggs, a portion of your grain, all owed to the manor, all taken as a reminder that your survival depends on his permission. If a harvest fails, the rents are still demanded. If a roof collapses, it must be repaired before the manor's fields go untended. To shirk these duties invites the weight of punishment. Even the church, bound closely with the Lord, reinforces this system. Tithes, 1/10 of your produce, are collected for the parish, ensuring that your obligations extend beyond your earthly master to the heavenly one. Together, Lord and church weave a net of control that shapes every aspect of your life. For the modern visitor, accustomed to individual freedom, such constant oversight would feel suffocating, a reminder at every turn that your existence is bound by forces beyond your choice. And yet, this system endured not merely by force, but by acceptance. For medieval villagers, the Lord was both protector and oppressor, the source of justice as well as its harsh hand. His hall offered security in times of war, his men defended the fields from raiders, and his authority kept order in a world that might otherwise descend into chaos. To question it openly was unthinkable, for rebellion was met with swift and brutal reprisals. Instead, people lived within its boundaries, finding small freedoms in community, in festivals, and in the rhythms of the seasons. For you, placed suddenly into this system, the shock would be sharp. The absence of rights, the ever-present threat of punishment, the knowledge that your labor belongs to another, all of it would weigh upon you with crushing force. To live even a single day under such power is to understand why survival in medieval England was not only a struggle against nature and hunger, but also against the structures of authority that defined every breath. As the day winds on and your body aches from labor, your thoughts turn to food. In medieval England, hunger was not a distant possibility, but a constant companion, lingering at the edge of every season. The bounty of your diet depends almost entirely on the harvest. Grain, wheat if you are lucky, rye or barley more often, is the foundation of nearly every meal. Bread, coarse and dark, fills your stomach but offers little comfort. Its texture is rough, sometimes laced with fragments of husk or grit from the millstones. At times, it can wear down your teeth, leaving them chipped or aching. Meat is a rare luxury, reserved for feast days or for those of higher station. Instead, your table is set with pottage, a thick stew of grains, beans, and whatever vegetables can be gathered from the garden. It is filling but monotonous, its flavor dependent on onions, leeks, or herbs. To imagine variety in food is a privilege of the wealthy. For most, survival rests on sameness, and meals blur one into the next, heavy and unchanging. Drink, too, is governed by necessity rather than choice. Water is often unsafe, drawn from streams or wells easily contaminated by waste. To avoid sickness, people drink ale, weak, barely fermented, but safer than water. Even children take it daily, sipping from small wooden cups as naturally as you might reach for water. Stronger ale exists, but it is costly, brewed for celebrations or for sale in town. Wine is rarer still, imported and reserved for the nobility and the church. Milk is sometimes available, though often turned quickly into cheese or butter, since storage is difficult. Each sip, each bite, is not taken for pleasure but for survival. To live in this world is to eat to quiet hunger, not to indulge taste. Imagine if you were used to modern abundance, the difficulty of facing each meal with no spices, no sugar, no coffee, no tea, only the same coarse bread, the same earthy stew, the same thin ale. Over time, your spirit, as much as your stomach, would feel the weight of such repetition. The greatest fear is not monotony, however, but scarcity. A bad harvest spells disaster. Heavy rains, a late frost, or swarms of pests can ruin the crops on which all depend. In such years, famine tightens its grip swiftly. Villagers stretch what stores they have, drying peas, rationing grain, making bread with acorns or chestnuts mixed in. These substitutes, though edible, often bring illness, for they are difficult to digest and strip the body of strength. Hunger weakens you, and in turn makes you more vulnerable to disease. Starvation is not sudden here, but slow and relentless, sapping energy, dimming the eyes, hollowing the cheeks. For children and the elderly, the toll is often fatal. To face a winter without enough grain is to wake each day with the gnawing ache of hunger and the dread that tomorrow will be worse. Modern safety nets do not exist. There are no shipments of aid, no supermarkets, no government relief. The earth gives, or it does not, and survival is entirely at its mercy. Even in times of plenty, food is a marker of status. The Lord's hall enjoys bread of fine white wheat, roasted meats, and imported spices, pepper, cinnamon, even saffron, that transform their meals into feasts. Venison from the hunt, game birds, and fresh fish are common on their tables, prepared by cooks with knowledge of flavor and presentation. For the peasantry, such fare is only seen from a distance, perhaps smelled when smoke drifts from the manor kitchens. The gulf between classes is carved deeply in food itself. To eat coarsely is to be reminded daily of one's place in society, just as to feast richly is to display power and wealth. Even within the village, small distinctions are clear. A family with a cow might have milk more often. A household with a larger plot might grow beans or cabbages in abundance. Yet all are united by the ever-present threat that nature will strip these modest comforts away. Food is not merely sustenance here. It is survival, status, and a reminder of fragility all at once. As you sit by the fire, eating your pottage from a wooden bowl, the evening chill pressing in, you realize how foreign this relationship to food feels. In your own time, meals are chosen, varied, even designed for pleasure. But here, food is the measure of life's uncertainty. The fear of hunger governs planting and harvest, labor and rest, ritual and prayer. Thanksgivings at the church altar are not symbolic gestures, but earnest gratitude that the fields have yielded enough to carry the village through the year. The rhythm of life itself bends around the cycles of famine and plenty, hunger and relief. For you, accustomed to abundance, a single day of such fare may seem manageable. But imagine weeks, months, years bound to this narrow diet, always shadowed by the possibility of hunger, always dependent on the weather and the soil. In medieval England, to eat is never taken for granted. Each bite is survival. Each swallow is a reminder that the next harvest may yet fail. And so you finish your simple meal, your body warm for the moment, but your heart unsettled by the knowledge that hunger is never far away. As the last embers of daylight fade beyond the hedgerows, medieval England sinks into a darkness far deeper than you may ever have known. With no electric lamps, no street lights, and only the pale glow of the moon and stars to guide you, night falls like a heavy curtain. The village is cloaked in silence, broken only by the distant bark of a dog or the rustle of wind through thatch. Inside the small, smoky cottages, people gather close to the hearth for both warmth and reassurance. Firelight flickers across rough walls, casting shadows that dance like specters. There is both comfort and unease in this moment. Comfort in being together, unease in knowing that beyond these walls, the night hides dangers both real and imagined. Darkness was not simply a lack of light in this world. It was a realm of uncertainty, of spirits, thieves, and wild animals, a realm where safety could never be assured. Fear of the night is woven into every heart. Wolves, though less common by this period, still roam in some regions, their howls carrying across the fields. Bandits or desperate vagrants can creep under cover of darkness, seeking food, coin, or worse. For the superstitious, and nearly everyone in medieval England is, the night also belongs to restless spirits, witches, and demons. Tales circulate of souls wandering after sundown, of fairies luring the unwary into woods, of the devil himself lurking at crossroads. With no way to banish these fears except prayer, families often end the day with ritual. A blessing is murmured, a candle snuffed carefully, a cross traced over the body before lying down to rest. Sleep is sought not just as relief for weary muscles, but as a fragile refuge from the terrors that stir in the dark. To be awake in the dead of night is to feel exposed and vulnerable, your senses straining at every creak or whisper. When sleep finally comes, it is unlike the long, uninterrupted rest you may know today. Many medieval people experienced what historians call segmented sleep. After several hours of slumber, they would wake in the middle of the night for a period of quiet reflection, prayer, or even conversation before drifting back to rest until dawn. The reasons were practical. The absence of artificial light shaped the body's rhythm, and the long winter nights encouraged such patterns. In those wakeful intervals, the cottage might stir briefly, a log added to the fire, a whispered Ave Maria, perhaps a moment of hushed intimacy between husband and wife. Then, slowly, sleep would return. Beds themselves were shared and humble, a straw mattress on the floor, covered by woolen blankets if the household could afford them. Privacy was unknown. Parents, children, and sometimes animals all crowded together, their breath mingling in the cold night air. The comfort of company was essential, for solitude in the dark was unthinkable. The night was also a time of profound vulnerability. Fire, while essential for warmth, posed a constant threat if left untended. A stray spark could turn a thatched cottage into an inferno. Disease, too, seemed to sharpen its teeth at night, as fevers rose and coughing fits echoed in the stillness. And though doors were barred with heavy wooden bolts, no lock was truly secure against determined intruders. For lords and nobles, the night brought its own anxieties: fear of assassination, of rebellion, of betrayal within the very walls of the castle. Guards kept vigil on ramparts, their torches bobbing in the blackness, but even stone walls could not entirely dispel dread. To live in the medieval world was to live always with a sense of precariousness, and nowhere was that more keenly felt than in the hours when the world lay shrouded in dark and you were powerless to act. Yet despite the fear, night also carried its own kind of beauty. In the silence, the heavens stretched overhead in brilliant clarity, a canopy of stars unmarred by the glow of cities. The constellations told their own stories, signs of the seasons, portents for farmers, reminders of divine order. The rooster's crow or the faint paling of the eastern sky signaled the end of uncertainty, a slow lifting of the weight that night pressed upon every heart. To survive a medieval day was no small feat. To endure the night was a victory in itself. When dawn arrived, people rose stiff but grateful, offering prayers of thanks that they had been granted another day. For you, accustomed to modern comforts, such nights would be unbearable. The hard bed, the fearsome dark, the gnawing cold, the constant sense of danger. And yet, for the people of medieval England, this was simply life. Fragile, fearful, but endured with quiet resilience. Sleep was never guaranteed, safety never absolute. Each night was a crossing through uncertainty, and each morning was a gift earned in the struggle against shadow. And so, dear listener, our day in medieval England draws to an end. The sun has slipped beyond the horizon, and the village lies cloaked in uneasy darkness. You have walked through the rough waking, the meager meals, the relentless labor, and the quiet fears that came with every breath. Perhaps now it is clear why a single day would be more than enough, why survival itself was a constant struggle. What we might romanticize from a distance, stone cottages, flickering firelight, and rustic fields, was, in truth, a world of hunger, hardship, and harshness. For those who lived it, there was no escape, no pause, no comfort waiting around the corner. This was their life, every single day. And it is only through their resilience, their endurance, that history continued forward to bring us here. As you rest now, let your mind release those images of smoke-filled rooms, muddy roads, and endless toil. Breathe deeply, knowing that your world, for all its flaws, is softer, warmer, and far gentler than theirs. Allow sleep to come with the quiet gratitude that you are here, in this moment, and not bound to that harsher past. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May your night be peaceful, your dreams calm, and your rest untroubled. Until next time, sleep well, and remember, history is never far away.